So, first of all, thank you very much for everybody for coming, and thank you very much for Maxon for inviting me to talk about these kinds of things, but mostly about how I use Cinema 4D. And I think that's probably the most useful thing for everybody who's here to sort of like, I wanted to give you a bit of an insight into how I work, and I just wanted to make sure that I can give something back to you out there. I don't know if it's much or if it makes sense at all, but that was my intent. So without further ado, let's start with, this is what I do usually. It has a bit of sound, but don't worry about it. Mm-hmm. That's okay. So, thank you very much. A few words about me for a change. I was born in 1974, which is way older than most of the people who are working with Cinema 4D these days. So, I learned television and storytelling, and I started to work in advertising back in the day, which was in the late 90s. As an art director, and after that I started to get more into CG, just to see how that world works and what can I do with, you know, my imagination and that kind of stuff. And then I moved into producing content like motion graphics and visual effects and little stories and whatnot. And that took me to London, where I started to work for Territory from 2011 till very recently, up till 2018. And most of this time, I worked on feature films and R&D'd quite a lot of things and did the motion graphics a bit, but mostly films. So some of the films I've been lucky to work on are featured here, and some of them were pure visual effects jobs, some of them were more design-based stuff, some of them were sort of like working with art department. So I was sort of like fortunate enough to work with quite a few different things through these years. And what I learned whilst working on these films is partially what I want to share with you. So the first things first, does anyone know what this means? Price, yeah, there are quite a few people out there. When I started out back in the late 90s, I tried to use 3ds Max, and I tried to use Lightwave, and I probably wasn't patient enough. And I just thought that this is not for me. So when I found Bryce, which is I think it's the name of a canyon in the US or something like that, I felt really, really lucky because Bryce was a very, very sophisticated software which enabled you to do fantastical landscapes, sort of like a little bit fractally based things. So as long as you wanted to do something that has a green sky or some fantastic sort of like water surface underneath a mountain, you were really, really good. So that's why I started 3D work with, and I modeled the house I was living, and I think it took like 3.5 weeks or 4 weeks or something like that, and it was extremely painful. But that helped me sort of like searching for something that was a little bit better and a little bit more usable. So this is something that you could do with Bryce. I think it's fantastic, and you know, it's brilliant. All the people out there doing work with Terragen and World Machine, sort of like that was all done years before. So when I started to look for something else, I found Cinema 4D. And I mentioned to Friederike yesterday that 6.5 was the first version, but actually 6 was the first version. And I remember one of the versions came with some sort of a 3D magazine as some sort of a supplement, and I installed it. And then I started to play with it, and one of the first things that I did was that I bought a book that was dealing with the things, and then I managed to get hold of the copy of the user manual, the help system, which I think up till this day is one of the most fantastic features of Cinema 4D, because if you click on something, it gives you immediately an answer about what that tool does and how it does it and what can you do with it. So it was brilliant. So, first impressions, not always really good, but this was fascinating. I mean, like, I think it had bones rather than joints, but come on, it gave me an opportunity to be able to do character stuff. So, you know, it was in its very early stages, but it was still a properly usable tool, and it was such a good thing to sort of like immerse yourself in this and start producing work, regardless of how good it was or wasn't. But, you know, I never thought that, you know, I want to do anything else beyond Cinema 4D. So here are some of the renders that I did back in 2000. And on the right, that's my first paid job, which was some sort of an intro for an advertising agency I was working at the same time. And excuse me for the sizes of these renders, but those were less complicated times. So television was the king, which was 720, 576. Can you imagine what could you do with that today? You could render entire TV shows in 5 minutes or something like that. So, and you know, these were quite long weeks spent modeling and trying to come up with something that looks like a water surface, and it was just noises. And there was some sort of particle sprite generator software that I did these water lines with. And you know, it's close to 20 years old, but I don't think it's very, very bad. Those are sort of like the flags. You know, one of the first tutorials I've seen with cinema was about flags, and you just have to implement it. A funny anecdote with this whole thing, that one of my friends who knew my future wife, and she asked about me when we were sort of like, we started dating, and this guy said that, oh yeah, he's into modeling. He's doing some sort of a ship. He's modeling a ship. And my wife really thought that I'm in a garage with sort of like parts and just doing this together. And she was very reluctant to talk to me for a while because she really thought I'm some sort of a hermit, sort of like shacking up in a place like that. This is another little thing, stills from a short CG piece that was based on an artwork by an incredible artist called Kumi Yamashita, and I just wanted to tell this story. This is an incredible piece of artwork in Kyoto, and I just said to myself, that was around 2006, something like that, and I said to myself that I want to do something that tells a story. I want to do it entirely in Cinema 4D, and I want to make it look cinematic. So at around the time, none of these fantastic renderers were around, so it was just positioning lights very carefully and you know, just try to make it look cinematic. So I learned quite a lot. I did some commercial work with these kind of things, stills and products and that kind of stuff. And shortly after I did this, I moved to London. And this is where the first sort of like, this is a significant release of Cinema 4D that I really want to talk about. So one of my first film jobs was a film called Zero Dark 30, and at the time when I was working with Territory, R13 was the release that was around. And the way these kind of things happen is usually you get a request that, hey, can you do something, can you do a photorealistic sort of like rendering of a house where people are playing around? And we all need to see that from the air. And one of the things that I really enjoy about cinema is it gives you the confidence to say, of course we can do that. Or, you know, that's borderline foolish, or you're very confident. And I think the truth is somewhere in between. Because I knew that cinema has a character system, and I knew that somehow I'm going to be able to bring in mocap data, and we're gonna implement that into those characters, and those characters could look like they are running around. So you'll be the judge. These were the guys that recreated that. Do you remember these guys? They were part of Cinema 4D. Do you remember them? And I think they were in parts, as far as I know, right? So they were not really a constant mesh, but they were in parts. But you just chucked in a few bones or joints, rigged it up to this BVH motion data, and you know, put a camera way up, render it with proper lighting, and you know, it's good. So I wanted to show you if that works. Of course, now, yeah, I just move it somewhere else. There you are. One. Yeah. Epic. And there's another one. Let's move that over there as well. So this is the scene, right? So I think, it's going to be extremely interesting. So that was it. As you see, I'm not hooked up or anything. Okay, so as you see, there's some very low-res CG models and some BVH animations. And the reason why I wanted to show you this is sometimes this kind of work looks so complicated, and sometimes it takes an army of people to do this, because it needs to go through stages. It needs to be approved by this guy, that guy, whatever. If someone tells you that you need to do this, just go for it and find it out how. You can do it. The tools are there. So I guess that's the main reason why I wanted to talk about this. So let's get back to the other one. R16. Let's talk about that for a while. That was the... you're going to ask about, what about 14 and 15? I'm pretty sure they were around. I did not really remember using them, partially because, I didn't have time to think about that, but R16 was such a huge release, and it was for a very long time my favorite version. By the time we implemented a small render farm with Team Render, and just the capability of being able to hook up a few computers and do significantly more that you are able to do with one, or you have to run around manually. That was again a game changer. So MoGraph, which came slightly earlier, that was at its best. I really think that came into maturity around the time. 3D tracking, which I think it's got a. I talked to a few people, and some people say, yeah, why do you need 3D tracking within Cinema 4D? There are much better applications out there, or there are applications that do this more easily, whatever. I'll tell you one reason, and that reason saved us quite a lot of time on this film. And that was when you do post-viz, which is, are you familiar with the term post-viz? Post-visualization is usually when they shoot the film, shoot the plates, send it to someone, and they quickly want to see whether the ideas that they have about the visual effects work. So you need to work extremely fast. You need to be able to track. You need to be able to put 3D stuff into shots like this. So if there's an application that allows you to do that, you're in the business. That's a really, really important thing. So besides the post-viz stuff, we use Ghost in the Shell as a test bed for some of the techniques. And again, some of these things may appear to be much more complicated than they are. But one of the things that we usually do in a show like this, or I did on a show like this, let me go back to this thing. Hello guys, you're still around? Yeah. Let me know when we found this. So, it's gonna be bonkers. You know what? That's not that. What I'm going to do, I'm going to speed it up a bit. Just going to bring it back halfway here, right? Not that it works. So, what we're going to do is I'm going to show you this as a very sort of like minimal example of a type of work that was happening in Ghost in the Shell. That's a 3D scanned mesh or a photogrammetry-based mesh, which was very roughly processed. It has some sort of texture. But the main thing is that we just used noises that were freely available within cinema, played with the scale, played with the speed of the animation. And we rendered out hundreds of passes, different sort of like scales, different speeds, different little things that, was around. Rendered splines, rendered particles. We emitted particles from these kind of things. And the reason why it was extremely an eye-opener for me, because we were just throwing crazy ideas at it. So, you think we should go out and shoot a plate and put it on the character, project it on the character, and emit particles from it? Yes, we can do that. We did that. We tried. It gave us some very interesting examples, and I think some of these models were extremely good, but just a bit of hiding in plain sight kind of thing. So Ghost in the Shell was a type of work like that. So MoGraph was used very, very extensively. And another little example of the type of work that's absolutely possible with that was this little thing here. Sometimes there's a request to do something that's particularly swirly, whatever it is. You don't necessarily know what these things are, but you just need to make it look interesting. And this could have been done with particles. But the reason why we did not do it with particles, and this is done with just MoGraph effectors and a sphere and some textures, is it was much faster at around the time. It was much easier to iterate. You do not have to cache anything. You do not have to sort of like deal with how you're going to render those particles. It was just polygons floating in. I don't know whether that's visible or not, but this is some stuff that's sort of like, just let's render this very quickly. Yeah. It's whatever. You can use it for anything. It's going to look good. Doesn't matter. The real thing is that it's really just a simple setup, and it's just effectors, and there's a sphere that's highly subdivided, and you just use poly effects and do some stuff with it. Again, the reason why I wanted to show you this is you can do it in quite a lot of ways. So there's no really a limitation with regards to what's possible. So let's go back to this thing. The other big thing about the film was that we had to work with other companies out there, and these other companies are usually quite huge. The MPCs, the double negatives, the frame stores of the world are incredibly big companies. They have their own pipeline, and if you want to work with them, if you have your own little company or whatever, you need to make sure that whatever you do is understandable to those guys, to those pipelines. And Alembic was around when we did this, and it was, again, a game changer, because you did something with MoGraph, which was incredibly good. But this is the thing that's, I think everyone should sort of like think about that in this world today, everybody's collaborating with everybody. So Alembic is a great way of sharing data, because you do what you want to do with it, you have the animation baked in, and then you give it to someone else and they do whatever they want to do with it. If you don't do that, then you just work in isolation. So MoGraph, you could do very great things very easily, but there was not an easy way to get everything out from MoGraph to Alembic, and I think, we started to talk to the lovely people of Maxon, and I think we discussed an idea about how it's possible to have something that bakes everything down and just creates a package that has everything in it, and you can give it to someone else. I think that's, again, a brilliant thing to do, and it was very, very useful. Another film that I worked on with R16 was was this one, which was a very, very different beast. That was Blade Runner 2049, and it was good while it lasted. So, oh, back again. Again, Cinema 4D was the main tool that we used on this one, but it was a very different one. It was much less technical, and it was about experimentation. It was about what can you do without using Cinema 4D, and what can you bring into Cinema 4D that keeps that thing that you did without it. So I started to experiment with, again, very easily understandable things like, let's go back to this. Or the other one. Where you are? Memorize which one is it from the top? Yes, one up. Cool. So this one. It's I recreated this scene. So back in London, we have this little box that's some company sends to us every week, and it's full of like broken vegetables, like, you know, wonky stuff, very ugly, sort of like apples and that kind of stuff, which are extremely good, but no one wants to buy them because they look ugly. And one of these things that they sent was this celeriac. I said turnip before that, but it's a celeriac. And I scanned it, and it's ugly as. I mean, like, you know, it's not a nice thing. But it also can double as a monster, or also can double as some organic thing. And the reason why I'm showing you this is I just wanted to illustrate how it worked. You just go out there, you see this, you take pictures with your phone, you create this photogrammetry-based asset in no time, and then you bring it into Cinema 4D, and then you put some animated displacement on it, or you can put some joints in it and just move it around with a noise or whatever, and then you put some lights around it, and you position your camera, and then you have something that wasn't done sort of like this way before, and you can do whatever you want to do with it. So again, very simple techniques. It's just about you and your creativity. So another interesting thing from that era was, you see something that's called lens or something like that? Huh? 3 up, this one. Wicked. So again, I recreated this scene just to the whole idea behind this, that was featured in the final film in a slightly different form. But the whole idea behind this was that when I was a kid, I used to have glasses, right? And when you go to the eye doctor, you have these lenses that the doctor puts in. And I just really love that sort of like, what happens if you put this in front of that? What happens if you put in front of that as well? So what I did, I set up like these lenses, which are just tank objects, those sort of like basic primitives. I just sort of like flattened them a bit and started to play with the refraction and started to sort of like shine lights through it and that kind of stuff. And can I bring that sort of like feeling back of different sort of like optical things interacting with one another? And again, you go out, you shoot some interesting things in nature, leaves and animals and plants or whatever, and I just put it on a transparent plane and just put a light underneath it and just let Cinema 4D do what it does. You know, these kind of things, in other cases you might not like them because, oh, that's a render artifact or that's some sort of a glitch or whatever, but look at that. This rendered in basically no time, and that thing over there, that would take quite a while to do it if you wanted to do it, but you know, happy accidents. So moving further on from this, where I am. Am I here? Here. Cool. The other thing that most people associated the company I worked for was UI, and UI is very easily done in Cinema 4D. You still have to be the designer, you still have to come up with the components, but you chuck it into a cloner, create these grid systems, and render it away. Done. You can very easily manipulate it with MoGraph and all sorts of stuff like that. Particles, very easily done these days. And just to give you an idea how that idea that I just demonstrated came through the film. It was something like this. Moving on, R18, R17, again, don't ask me, I don't remember. Must have been, maybe it's just me. But R18 came about, and the film that I associate R18 with is Pacific Rim, which again, you saw how I tend to use Cinema 4D, but it was a very, very different beast. It was about managing insane amount of data, making sure that you can render what you plan to render. Take system. How many of you are using the take system on a daily basis? It's quite a lot, yeah. But I know people who are really, really sort of like, I don't want to use it, I don't understand it, I don't want to use it, that doesn't make my life easier. Let me tell you one thing. Without that, we couldn't finish this film. Because that kind of thing that we created, which is lots, like hundreds of these little widgets, right? Which are mostly MoGraphy, clonery things, quite a lot of graphic design elements extruded in 3D space and brought into cloners. There was quite a lot of heavy modeling going on as well, creating these organic or sort of like angular shapes. But to manage that kind of data, and when someone says, everything is all right, except that thing, you need to be on top of things. And when you know that, okay, that's a different take, and I can render that, and I can make a little script that enables me to bring that in without having to have someone working on it, that's brilliant. That's also when I think for me, Cinema 4D really, really proved that it's entirely capable of doing these kind of films, because we were working in a pipeline that used Nuke. And we worked in a proper feature film environment. And how many of you worked on big or feature films or visual effects houses? You know that it's very departmentalized, right? And I think that's one of the main differences between smaller places and bigger places, that big places are always very rigidly regulated. So there are people who only care about lighting, there are people who do modeling, there are people who do rigging, on and on. In smaller places, there used to be more generalist kind of approach. And in these big places, if you give a compositor a set of AOVs, which are not perfectly suitable for that Nuke script that someone set up, they're not gonna, that's a generalization, but in quite a few cases, they're not gonna willing to put energy into troubleshooting, or, you know what, if I do a bit of gamma shift on this AOV, that's gonna be good. So you have to be absolutely sure that what you render from Cinema 4D is good. And we were absolutely sure about that. And I particularly enjoyed the looks on some people's faces when you render these big shows and they hear that they are done with Cinema 4D. I don't know. I mean, like, is it just me who sort of like finds that? But when I talk to some of the guys, they always say, "Hey, you must be using Maya, because everybody uses Maya. No one uses Cinema 4D." I think I particularly made myself proud on. Yeah, but that was done in Cinema 4D, and I really love that kind of like. No, come on, you can't be serious. Yes, that was done in Cinema 4D. So, I guess what I'm trying to say is, don't let anyone tell you that it can't be done in cinema. Everything can be done in cinema, and what's even more important, you can have fun whilst doing that everything. So here's the section where I wanted to show you a little tip or whatever it was. Couple of sort of like years ago, I was really into fractals, as everyone else around the time. and fractals were that elusive unicorn of the CG world. You have these incredible pieces of software where you can create fractals with, you can go through all sorts of variations. You're never really able to do too much with it, right? You can't really print it out. You can't really export the mesh. And it's just sort of like, it's like, it was I know that there are software capable of doing that these days, but back in the days it was not really possible. So I wanted to find a way to get fractals into Cinema 4D somehow. So there was this application called Mandelbob 3D. You create the fractal that you want, and then you can position a camera, and you can render out slices of that Mandelbob fractal. Depending on the resolution, you render out 200, 500, 1,000, whatever. And that's when I sort of like recognized that, hey, that's an image sequence. And if I play that back and I correlate the speed of the playback with particle emission, I can have something interesting. So this is an image sequence that I rendered out of cross-sections of fractal. And then it just emits particles where it's bright. And it doesn't do too much. It's not, depending on the resolution or the amount of particles, it can be quite sort of like detailed. But what you can do with it is you can just render that. I don't know what it is. Might be useful for something. And now you can sort of like create volumes from it. So again, if you crank up the resolution, that could be very, very interesting. That was something that I came about a couple of years ago, and I never mentioned it. So I really thought that's going to be interesting. Was it interesting or no? No, that's all right. You can. No. Come on, I did not do it because. But imagine the idea is that you can have an image sequence. You can have a CT scan of a person, and you can sort of like emit particles from that and see where you end up with. One other little thing that I wanted to show you, amongst a few, is when I was working in these films, I was always admiring the guys who were doing the humans, the human characters, the digidoubles. And that came a long way. Back in the day, they used to be quite crude, but these days you can find really, really good ones. So one of the things that I always did in my spare time, I was trying to do something that enables me to have a digidouble in Cinema 4D. So again, this is my father-in-law. I asked him, do you mind sitting down for 20 minutes in the garden, taking pictures? And this is, again, a very rough proof of concept kind of thing. It's not super detailed, but what it enabled me to do is, again, take, with my iPhone, I used to use a proper DSLR camera, but these days I just use my iPhone, take 150 pictures of someone just walking around doing this and that, whatever, process it through some photogrammetry application, remesh it, and then you play with the shaders, you set it up, hair. That's one of the underrated things in cinema. I really love Cinema 4D's hair system. And if that character was meant to be in the background in a film, and you need like 200 of them, you can build up a little library of your friends and put them into your every movie. I wanted to show you how that sort of like setup looks in cinema. Not a big deal. I have to go through this again. 1, 2, 3 down. It's quite analog, isn't it? Doing it this way. Yep. Yeah. So this is the whole thing. Again, a couple of years ago, this would have been, oh my God, this is fantastic. Now everyone should do it. If you need a character, you can rig it properly. You can animate it. You can create blend shapes. And again, no one can tell you that character work can't be done in cinema as much as in any other software. So that brings me to the next little thing. I started to do these kind of things. A simple tool. Whoop. And this is something that, again, was in the back of my mind for quite a while, and I had recently time to finish it. If you work in a facility or a company that does modeling, or you have models to be approved by the clients, it's quite handy to have something that's a thing that helps you present those kind of little things. And my thought process was, I do something which is a very simple sort of like espresso-based setup, and I do a few variations of it in Redshift, Arnold. Probably I have to do V-Ray again after yesterday's announcement, which was really interesting. And I just put it on my website, and if you want to use it, or if it helps you in any way, just do that. Let me show you how it works. One up. Oh, come on. So that's where we are. This is a little system, which I called Slater, because it has a Slate function as well. I don't know how many of you use Slate functions. That's if you render something, you have a frame before that render that tells whoever looks at it who you are, what shot is that, what's the frame range, and that kind of stuff. And the way I did it is, you can choose between certain things. You can change the background. So this incredibly highly detailed graphical design that I did, you can replace it with anything you want. You can do your own stuff. It's really tough to jump with these. I'm just gonna screw it up. So you can change the background. You can change certain things. So what happens here? I think. Let me just go to this. Am I at the right thing? No. So what happens here is you have these options. You can type these in. And then it changes that to SuperMeet. Then you can put in your show, the shot number. It also creates the file naming with that shot number. You can put in what sort of pipeline stage you want to have that, if that makes any sense. And you can put the frame ranges in and the date. So what happens after that is you bring in your asset, which is a 3D scan model, which I downloaded from I think it was a French museum website or something like that. You put it in there, and you can choose from certain backgrounds. And this is the most simple version, because it uses a MoGraph cheat. Because back in the day, when you wanted to have a quick render, you didn't want to wait for GI or proper lighting. So it uses a MoGraph setup that uses a HDR to color lights, and it gives you an illusion of different sort of like backgrounds and whatevers. So you can choose between daylight, you can choose between night, you can choose between studio rig or whatever. You can replace it with your own HDRs, and you can just go into it and change anything you want. So there's going to be a few versions of this. Essentially, what it does is you bring in your model, put it in the middle, and just press render, and it saves this, and then you can show it to whoever you want to do it. I don't know whether that's going to be useful for anyone else except me, but I thought, maybe someone wants to use it. I'm pretty sure that everyone is getting really hungry as we get closer to the end of the presentation. So let me just very quickly say a few things about this and the future projects that I'm working on. So when R20 came about, I don't know, how many of you have used it, R20? It's most of you. So what's the thing that you like the most? Starts with an F, ends with ilts, filts. Do you like that? It's pretty good. Volumetric modelings, that kind of stuff. I think everyone can agree that those functions, these two functions, if they were around a couple of years ago, that would have made my life much easier. Because on one hand, on the other hand, we invented these crazy ways of doing the same things. But what I like about R20, it makes life so much easier on some of these projects. A few words about this. This is a a passion project of mine called Time Masters. There was this French comic book artist called Jean Giraud, also known as Möbius. Do you know about him? Möbius used to create sort of like comic books and that kind of stuff, and he was also working as a production designer on films like the first Alien, The Fifth Element, and he was lined up to do Blade Runner, the first one with Ridley Scott. But he wasn't available because he did a little animated film with French and Hungarian artists called the Time Masters, which was, I think it was around 82 or something like that. And as a kid, I was fascinated by this project. And the film suffered from not having enough money. So the way to give back to the people again, I really thought about bringing some of that magic back. And we have a script that plays before the film, so there's not going to be any problems with the whole story. And it plays in the same universe. So what I'm doing these days is sort of like, you've probably seen that, just recreating some stuff that could be used in scenarios. These are just little tests. These have nothing to do with the whole thing. But this is what I don't know. I don't know whether that's going to be a full CG thing, or it's going to be a live action thing, or it's going to be a cartoon thing. We are creating these assets right now and working on the story. So if anyone wants to be involved, just hit me up and I'm happy to get you on board. I think it's very, very important. As a thing that I would like to say to you, it's very important to find something that you are passionate about. If that's your daily work, that's brilliant. If that's not, then find something that makes you happy and using these kind of things. Again, this is all done in Cinema 4D, and what can I say? There's another little thing, another film I'm working on. This is going to be done before that. It's a short film called Junk. It's going to be a mixture of miniatures and character modeling, and we are testing different ways of virtual production, which seems to be the big thing these days. But here's another little tip that I wanted to show you before it gets easy. This is something that I shot in Brussels, where I thought that it looks really, really interesting. So one of the things that I wanted to show you was, again, a little tip, which is, if you have an iPhone, you can hook it up to Cinema 4D. There are ways to do it. It's quite complicated these days, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be much easier in the future. But in the meantime, if you want to create incredibly good camera moves, and I know that there are tools out there, but what I do quite often is, I think it's in this one. What I do quite often is take a piece of footage and just track it, and then use that camera move for something else. I think that's a really, really interesting way of using this kind of thing. And if you think about it, this is an analog virtual production hybrid, because you still do the camera moves, you can do your whatever you want to do, you track it, and you have a much more organic camera movement in no time. And because the Cinema 4D tracking tools are really, really fast and done easily, you know, I don't know. I like the point cloud. Cool. So going back to this, just to sort of like, am I just sort of like just moving around with the mouse without any idea where I am? Does anyone see the mouse? Oh, back here. Cool. So this is a little character test that I did. Again, it's an extremely simple setup, and it's not done really, really well, but it enables me to judge whether that's going to be the right thing. I can show this to people. People can say, yeah, you know what, this character looks like this and that. You don't want to do that. And it's done in half a day, and I'm not joking. So I think all I wanted to say is just take the tools, just do whatever you want to do, create, don't be held back by anything. Don't let anyone tell you not to do what you want to do, and keep on exploring Cinema 4D. Thank you very much for listening to my ramblings. And I'm saying this completely honestly, if anyone wants to talk about anything, or if you need any help or collaboration or anything like that, just hit me up, and I'm happy to do that. Enjoy your lunches, and see you very, very soon. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.